Okay, she is Sue Doyle, and she is the head of industry programs at OatSystems and Checkpoint. And Sue is going to be talking about modernizing DCs with RFID. Sue, you should have control of the keyboard.
Thank you, Mark. I think the whole idea of modernizing DCs with RFID came from a discussion that I had in the Midwest in June with a set of supply chain leaders, where literally one of the leaders said, why can't I modernize my existing DCs? I have a lot of DCs. I wish I had the capital investment for shiny new equipment, but I need a way to make a dumb DC smart. So instead of putting dumb DC smart on my first slide, I knew that there's a need to talk about how we can use sensors to make supply chains and make DCs work more effectively. So this is a little bit about Checkpoint and Oat, and now we are now part of CCL Industries. So the funny thing is, Oat has been a pioneer in the RFID business for a very long time. In fact, I found an article in RFID Journal about this new startup called Oat, putting together enterprise software for RFID mandates back in 2002, which brought a smile to my face. So we've certainly been doing this for a while. This year we got purchased by CCL Industries, who is one of the leading packagers and labeling firms in the world. So as the industry gains momentum, and there will be more need to implement innovative solutions in labeling and packaging, embedding RFID and sensors into products themselves, we're very well positioned to do that. So modernizing DCs with RFID. So a few of the things that I'll be talking about today are market dynamics. This market is very dynamic. It keeps changing. Every year, every month, there is new information that helps us do our jobs better, and new information that helps inform our business decisions around sensors. I'm going to share some findings from the 6th Annual State of the Supply Chain study that was actually done by one of Justin's colleagues, Dr. Brian Gibson at Auburn University. What it takes to transform DCs to meet these new market realities, and how do we fast-track this type of modernization with sensor technology? What can we do to take an existing DC that may have old infrastructure and make it much more efficient in today's age, and talk about a few best practices. So let's talk market dynamics. So this complicated graphic is a simple illustration to say that supply chains are really much more customer-facing, and they may not even really be chains anymore. They're not linear chains, they are networks with multiple nodes. And supply chain leaders have been looking to make their networks much more flexible and much more efficient, because everything centers around the customer. So whether you are delivering an omni-channel order to a customer from a DC in retail, whether you are tracking work in process for a custom order in industrial manufacturing, increasingly your supply network is more customer-facing. It's not in the back room anymore. And so there's more exposure, there's more risk, and there's more business visibility as well to make the right supply chain investments so that customers are not disappointed. So because of that, there's an increased focus on efficiency. And one of the other focuses that we've seen is that finance, that CFOs at many companies are getting more involved in the supply chain, because supply chain networks are so complex, there is inventory at every node, and that becomes very, very expensive in terms of capital expenditure. So it's not just, do you have the inventory, but is it in the right place at the right time at the right node, so that it can be repurposed as quickly as possible and sold, instead of being, scrapped, laying idle, or potentially marked down later in the game. Manufacturing mandates are also back. So Justin talked about 2005 Walmart providing compliance mandates for RFID. Well, now we're in 2016. As retail adoption accelerates for RFID, more retailers are working with their suppliers to tag with RFID tags, and that's creating a new risk and reward dynamic as well that I'll go into. DCs, through all this, through all the changes in the supply chain, are still the nerve center, the mission control in many supply chain networks. And they need to adapt quickly to this new reality. And if you think about it, DCs really, I would say they're the haves and they're the have-nots. There are DCs that are shiny and new and 100% automated, and they have robots moving around to handle put away and handle fulfillment. And you also have DCs that are a warehouse or an offsite or something that is mostly around cross-docking and or manual processes. So there's a big difference between DCs. So to go to Auburn University, they released with RILA, the Retail Industry Leaders Association, and I'm going to use some retail examples here because that's probably where we're seeing the highest rate of change and the highest pressure to do more with less. But they published this year with 50-plus supply chain leaders in North America. So just to give you an idea, most of them had sales over $1 billion. Omnichannel was one of the considerations. They were senior level, which meant they were senior director or VP level or above, and they had combined supply chain experience of over 20 years. So because of that, these people have been in the industry in a long time, and they have not seen the rate of change that they have seen in the last year or 18 months, which is quite startling. Here are a couple of quotes. Our burning challenge is how to get more capacity out of our existing footprint, be able to continue to be able to service our stores as effectively as possible, given the changing business environment that we're in and this changing supply chain model. In other words, everything's changing. The ground is shifting underneath our feet. And if you think about what supply chain leaders are really, really good at and traditionally have been good at, is moving big boxes around. It's no longer moving big boxes around. It's a lot of little boxes. It's a lot of little orders, a lot of fill-in orders, a lot of expediting, a lot of omni-channel. And so how do you move little boxes around effectively? RFID can help. So here's another note from the priorities from retailers, and these are the 50 supply chain leaders that were interviewed in depth. Out of the 4 key priorities they had, 3 of them are directly impacted by RFID. Improve omni-channel speed and cost, rationalize and optimize inventory placement, support change management across the supply chain. So you see I put a little RFID circuit in those 3. But if you look at it, supply chain was always a backroom function for many organizations. It was something to drive costs down and to eliminate risk. But now it's also a growth driver. So how can you use that supply chain as a competitive advantage? So that's where the thinking is. If you think about where they're investing this year as opposed to last year, where the 3 RFID circuits are supply chain process optimization, omni-channel fulfillment, and technology investments. Again, getting the right inventory in the right node at the right time. So if you think about inventory across nodes, this is a little diagram I have for omni-channel fulfillment, right? A customer may order something, and a retailer, if they order something on mobile or online, needs to figure out where is the closest place and the most efficient place to fulfill that order. And if that order has 8 items, 3 may be in one place, 1 may be in another place, and so on and so forth. So they may be fulfilling an order across multiple places. If that's the case, it usually goes to the DC, but many retailers have complex algorithms to figure out where do we fulfill this. The issue is this can get very, very expensive if you don't know exactly what you have, and you don't understand the demand signal. So it's one thing to say that store 842 or 042 on the slide fulfilled this order, but is that really where the customer was, or was it far away from the customer? So understanding more about demand patterns and having that kind of operational intelligence really helps supply chains move better. So one of the things that Justin brought up is manufacturing mandates are back. We're partying like it's 2005 again. I was at GS1 Connect 2016 in June, where retailers and suppliers got together and retailers had their meetings with their suppliers to let them know what their expectations were in terms of data exchange and RFID for the year. At that conference, I've quoted two things here. One of them is from Dr. Bill Hardgrave, who Justin works for, that the new number now, as of this June, is over 50% of apparel retailers in the U.S. are using RFID in some form, and that number is going up this year as we speak. In turn, if you think about what the CEO of GS1 US has observed, Bob Carpenter, over 40% of apparel brands are now starting to tag in some form. It may be one category, one item from one retailer, but there's certainly momentum here. And there appears to be a tipping point. If you are an apparel brand that is tagging, let's say, 30% or more of your inventory and having special packs, special one-offs for different retailers, different stores, different formats, at that point, it may make sense to RFID tag on a larger scale, whether someone's asking you to do it or not, because too many exceptions lead to the rule. So one of the things we looked at, and Justin brought this up as well, that there are many different ways for errors to happen in the process. When you are tagging, when you're encoding, when you're receiving, when you're shipping, those errors can propagate. So we took some of the numbers that, we sat in on some of these supplier meetings, and we heard what the retailers had to say in terms of, here's what you will be fined if you do not pass an item-level RFID audit, which means that the tag isn't encoded properly, or the tag is missing, or the wrong number of items in the manifest, you will be fined. And we also took the other side, which is the carrot, not the stick, which is, here's how much we expect your sales to increase based on what we've seen. And this is from straight from the retailer's presentations. So based on that, we just took an example. If you are a brand that is shipping 5 million units a year, let's say, an average price of, let's say, $35, then RFID tagging the inventory for that retailer, those 5 million items, could result in an $8 to $18 million sales increase this year. Could also result in a decrease of between $500,000 to $1.5 million worth of audit fines based on what the major retailers are mandating. So that's an interesting risk-reward now for brands to understand not only what risk avoidance they have in terms of encoding properly at high volumes and tagging properly, but also what sales increase they can expect. So how do we make this happen? So let me hark back to the meeting I was at in June, where I went through this very shiny automated DC. It was so shiny, you almost needed sunglasses in it. It was a sunny day, a lot of bright shiny metal, a lot of automation systems, shiny conveyors everywhere. It was very impressive. And when we went back to discuss the process automation in the DC, and this was over, a 1 million square foot facility, one of the supply chain leaders said, I have old brick buildings. I don't have the time or the capital budget to invest in DCs. How do I make my current DCs smarter? And if you think about it, most companies have more than one DC. They've got 5, maybe 10, with the impetus to try to fulfill customer expectations no matter where they are. You need to be located near your customers. So having one shiny DC in the Midwest is not going to help you meet delivery dates. So what we're finding is that if you add sensors to a traditional DC, you can make it work very much like a fully automated DC. It's no substitute, but when you have multiple DCs and multiple years to complete capital investments like this is a quick way to get started. So if you think about what the DC automation is on the left with what I would call a fully automated DC, shiny DC, material handling systems, warehouse control systems are making that happen. And that has a lot to do with the infrastructure of the DC itself. But if you look at what you can do with sensors in a traditional DC, you can add sensors, you can add process automation so that you're managing exception handling at the point of use. And then you also have data analytics to make you smarter so you know where to allocate your inventory and you understand, again, where the demand signal is coming from. You understand what potential problematic suppliers or retailers there may be, and you don't spend a lot of time with paperwork and labor issues. Because one of the biggest trends, by the way, in the supply chain is DC labor is really hard to find. Any place where you find a DC, people are hiring and poaching some other people. It's a huge issue in the supply chain industry just to hire the right people to do the job. There's just more demand than there is supply. So the more you can automate, the more risk resilient you can make your supply chain. So here's a little map of places you can make a DC smarter with sensors. Justin covers some of these in his presentation, but if you look at A, inbound receiving, can you make sure that if you are in control of your four walls, make sure that what you're getting is correct in the first place, and that is, sensors at the dock doors, and handling, quarantine. What we find is that if you get an incorrect shipment or a shipment that doesn't look like it matches, it ends up sometimes being in limbo because people will get to it when they get to it, and as a result, you have a lot of expensive inventory sitting out there that's not being used. B, inventory management in the DC. So we're finding some DCs use RFID on forklifts, using RFID for directed put away, and just managing inventory, while it is there in the DC. It's not always feasible to have overhead sensors if you have a very large DC, but if you think about specific items that are either high risk or perishable, high value, it makes sense to have certain zones which have always-on inventory management in DCs. If you look at C, conveyance systems, you can actually monitor conveyance systems in an automated DC using sensors. D, pick, pack, and rework. This is one of the most manual areas of a DC. I've seen very shiny automated DCs that literally have very manual processes where people are manually picking orders. So once the conveyor belt stops, you have human hands, and that's one of the most difficult areas to automate in a DC that RFID can help a great deal with. And then finally, outbound shipments, making sure that your compliance is up, making sure that you don't spend a lot of time handling administrative paperwork, customs paperwork, and making sure that you are as efficient as possible. Remember, the outbound shipment may be going to a customer. We're doing more customer-facing logistics, so you want to make sure the customer is not disappointed. One of the other good things that's happening in the market is that RFID sensors are getting better. RFID labels are getting better. Some of the questions came up with metal and different materials. One of the things we've found is as certainly RFID picks up in retail, retailers who started in apparel also want to track categories that are high risk, high margin, like cosmetics, like jewelry. So there are many new tags that are being developed that we're working with to handle things like fragrance, for instance, that have liquid and sometimes metal and glass and are difficult to transport and high value, may have metallic packaging. Those new developments have really made it easier to track a wide variety of goods, and that continues to evolve. If you think about speed and throughput, too, and if you look at barcode, if you can receive shipments with an RFID handheld, that's about 25 times faster than barcode. If you can verify shipments on an RFID table, which has less UI and less user intervention, it could be 50 times faster. If you could print and encode and apply labels using high-speed printing, it could be 150 times faster to do printing and encoding. And if you look at an RFID tunnel, you could be up to 2,000 times faster. So this isn't necessarily the solution for every DC, but it shows that the capabilities are there to make this much more efficient with sensors. I always like to suggest, and I know that Justin went over this as well, the basic blocking and tackling, if you can automate shipping and receiving, if you can make sure that ASNs are verified and that what is on the manifest is in the actual box, you're way ahead of the game. Auburn actually ran a study, I think it was 2011, that 5.8% of all ASNs were incorrect. And that's each ASN. So every time the shipment got passed, that error could be propagated. So think about how much that could save if you were actually verifying shipments moving forward. So the idea is, again, address issues before they impact the customer, because the customer is at the end of the line. So how do we move forward? Recommendations would be focus again on customer-facing logistics. There's a customer at the end of the line or the order, and it's very easy to get backing for your project if it's customer-related. It goes up to the top of the queue. again, start with basic block and tackle processes, pick to light, fulfilling orders, shipping, receiving. Leverage the market momentum. If you're being asked to comply with a mandate, whether you're an aerospace manufacturer, supplier, or apparel manufacturer, supplier, use that to drive more visibility and more support for your RFID project. And the same thing with increased regulations for perishable goods, for high-risk goods, anti-counterfeiting and the like. Start within your four walls. What can you control before expanding out too much? Some of the supply chain initiatives do get bogged down because once you start involving too many people, too many players, too many parties, it takes longer to drive results. And then consider some of the new RFID tools out there, such as the high-speed RFID options that I outlined and some of the new labeling technology. So this week you'll be getting an email, a thank you note with the recording information, and you'll also be getting a planning guide from us, which will have a little more detail, so I don't have to talk so fast. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Mark. Thank you.
Okay, Sue, thank you very much. We do have some questions, so let's start with those. I'm interested in RFID. No, sorry, that was one we did already. Is RFID appropriate for the pharmaceutical industry?
Yes, absolutely. Well, the pharmaceutical industry is a complex value chain, right? So it's everywhere from pharmaceutical manufacturing to distribution to the end customer. It absolutely makes sense because you are dealing with controlled substances in many cases, or you're dealing with highly perishable substances. So, all the way from manufacturing to an in-store pharmacy, we've worked with pharmaceutical manufacturing firms in the past that track controlled substances as they move from a locked area to another area in the distribution channel, and also to verify shipments, because very often with pharmaceuticals, they're a high-value item that has a very high street value, and it's very easy for items to get missing between nodes. So absolutely, I think it's finding the specific business case. There are always some products in a pharmaceutical manufacturer's line that have higher risk, higher value than others, and I would start there as opposed to trying to track everything, anything and everything.
Okay, how are cross-reads avoided with today's technology?
Okay, good question. So one of the reasons that we developed RFID tunnels is because a DC can be a very noisy environment. So for instance, if you look at one of the places that we started deploying RFID tunnels in Inditex, which is Zara's parent in Spain, but they're processing, I think it's almost 4 million garments a day. And their DCs are very noisy because of the high throughput, and they have dozens of tunnels in the same DC. So the whole idea of something like an RFID tunnel is to provide the shielding, the insulation, so that anything that's within that tunnel on that conveyor belt is shielded from a hardware standpoint. And from a software standpoint, there are filtering algorithms that handle the error checking as well, and also can read from multiple angles. So despite, no matter what angle the labels or tags may be, it can read all the RFID inlays at a very high speed. But it's taken a lot to perfect the technology, but I think we're at the point now where we're very, very reliable, 99.99% reliable once we set a system up and tune it. So that's the easiest way to avoid cross-reads, is actually to have that controlled environment of a tunnel. But there are also many other things that can be done too at dock doors and more open areas in terms of shielding and software algorithms that can make the read rate much, much more reliable.
Okay. What applications of RFID have you seen in white goods handling? Okay, so by white goods, more of hard goods. Is that what your question? I'm not sure. For appliances? I was thinking appliances, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I think for appliances, we're seeing more in terms of the IoT for ongoing service and maintenance. That's an emerging development for white goods and appliances. I think when it comes to hard goods,
Hard goods is a very wide area, so you're looking at electronics, you're looking at health and beauty. And again, with the wider variety of RFID tags that are now available, more and more categories have the option of using this technology.
Right, okay. Are there any limitations in using RFID for tracking bio-based products?
Oh, that's a good question. That may actually be a better question for Justin or for you, actually, Mark, in terms of biological substances. And I mean, liquids are no longer an issue with the right tags and the right testing. But in terms of biological substances, and I'm not sure if the question is about what's the impact to the biological substances, which I would say is none with RFID technology.
Yeah,
I think that. Yeah, I think that's your question.
There have been studies done on the impact on biologics, and unless you leave it sitting under a reader for a few hours, there's really minimal impact. It's usually not in the read zone very long, so it doesn't have any impact.
So
go ahead, Justin.
I can say this. There are RFID systems that they use for tracking lab mice for some very detailed medical trials. So I know that the impact from RFID on the biological side has got to be pretty much nothing if they're willing to use it in peer-reviewed research.
Okay. I'm interested in RFID system for a production company, sound systems, light, staging components in an internal warehouse for PI tracking through transportation. But objects themselves seem to have plenty of limitations, density and metal. Not a single system that I could find. There seems to be a reasonable ROI potential. What does a solution look like, or what does one look for in a solution? So someone wants to track components for staging productions, and they have a lot of components that are metal or are highly dense. What would a solution look like?
Okay, so I think the first thing is, what will work on metal, right? So I think that you'll find that on-metal tags are a lot more sophisticated than they used to be, and there may not be one tag that fits every single item that you have, but if you look at companies like Petrobras, for instance, right, in terms of oil exploration, a lot of metal products that are outdoors, they were able to standardize, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, I think it was 5 different tags for everything that they have. They were able to boil it down from 20 different tags to 5 different tags, and I think in some facilities it's only 3. They found on-metal tags that met all the criteria that they needed. So fewer tags is a good solution. I don't know, Justin, if you have any thoughts on electronics or...
Sorry, I was on mute. So for tag, are you asking what tags on electronics specifically?
Electronics, video equipment.
So it should be tagging similar to electronics like DVDs and TVs and things like that, I would think, from a product component mix. So I haven't heard of anything, but it should be very doable.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing for IT assets as well, and it should be pretty similar to that with an asset tracking application, check in and check out, and then potentially, tracking, shipping, receiving as it meets one point to the next point.
I have heard of a company that was doing equipment rental for events, like concerts and things like that, and for PAs and amps and all that kind of stuff, and mic cables and everything. And they were looking at an RFID system to validate that they had a full trailer load of everything ready to go. I think they're mainly using hang tags for that, but it wasn't an issue.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Sue. That's all the time we have for questions, and we appreciate your supporting this event and taking the time to present.
Thank you, Mark.